Lots of backups.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, thank you for coming. I appreciate you very much. It was a pleasure getting to know you over dinner, and a weird coincidence on how we even met.
Sure.
Because, we won't go into details, but in short, you were vetting me to see if I'm good enough for your family members to seek employment with.
They talk a lot when you give them a whiskey.
That's what they said. But yeah, funny enough, it was just a LinkedIn connection, and I reached out
Right.
because I looked into your profile. Obviously, I saw that you're doing a lot of interesting things between the company you currently are the CEO at and MVAT, which is a personal interest to me because I'm also a veteran. Also had to deal with PTSD and going back to society and figuring out my way in. And obviously MVAT has, a lot of dealings in the area. So before we dive into all of that, I was just super interested to get the basics of, who is Steve Sargeant. By the way, Steve Sargeant, I wonder in the military how much sergeant jokes were involved with that, if at all.
Well, that was one of the things early on, obviously, being a cadet, sergeant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then
How did they like that?
upon graduation, now I was lieutenant sergeant, and that became even more of a joke on the phone. In talking with, back in those days, there were a lot of secretaries in different offices, and you call up, and if you didn't speak slowly, you could be either a lieutenant or a sergeant, depending on what they heard.
So no actual sergeants took offense to the fact that that's your last name?
No, they didn't. My dad actually was a staff sergeant during the Korean War, which is probably one of the reasons why I considered the Air Force along the way growing up.
Oh, really?
Although that was not anything that he was pushing or whatever, but he had some of his uniform shirts that would tend to find themselves around different closets from early on until later on. And
Planted the idea there.
so, well, he didn't talk about it a whole lot, but talked about it enough and had lots of boxes of pictures of his time. He was in the Korean War for the entire time.
Oh, wow.
Because he had just gotten to Japan when it kicked off, and he was stationed in Japan for 4 years, and 3 of those were the war.
Wow.
Before he came home.
That's crazy. So for those growing up years, father was away.
No, actually, he was. The Korean War was over before I was born.
Oh.
He had come home. He had done his 4 years and had become a construction electrician.
So you're seeing this in all the memorabilia.
Yeah.
Wow. As a
He
kid.
enjoyed his time when he was in the Air Force, despite being at war, etc. But enjoyed the camaraderie, the discipline, and the education opportunities that he got.
Right. Okay. That's amazing. So before I steer away even further, because my ADHD just keeps latching onto
Sure.
interesting points, you grew up where?
So I grew up in Defiance, Ohio, and until about 10 or 11, and then we moved to Toledo, and I went to high school in Toledo. And about 2 years before I graduated, I came home one day and I said, I think I really want to try and go to the Airforce Academy.
So it was already a high school thought.
It was a high school thought, and I was probably headed somewhere else. I was probably headed off to medical school at Ohio State or something on that line, and I came home and I went, well, maybe I could do both.
It's a big
And then-
fork.
And then over time, I decided, nope, I didn't want to do both. I wanted to be a pilot, so off I went.
Nice. So you decided, even though the fork presented itself, it was clear you're going to be a pilot. That's what you wanted?
I knew I wanted to be an officer, and I knew I wanted to fly.
Okay, so that's a
So-
pretty good combination. It
Yeah,
usually
so
ends
off
up.
I went, and was fortunate enough to win an appointment to the Air Force Academy, and
Which one?
to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs,
Oh, nice.
U.S. Air Force Academy. So went there and made it through the 4 years, and off we went.
Wow.
And graduated during the Cold War, and first assignment overseas in Europe. So
Wait, 1 second. Assignment. What about joining the academy, training? What kind of airplanes?
well, there weren't a whole lot of airplanes involved in being a cadet.
Right.
There was one
Some testing.
kind of
but-
motivational ride back when there were T-33s, and you got to get in the back seat out at Peterson Air Force Base, and for one afternoon, that was a pretty memorable day for all of us in my class.
Wow.
And then later, some people went into the sailplanes, and they did soaring throughout most of their time there at the academy. And others, like myself, in our senior year, we learned to fly.
Right.
And and that was kind of a screening program to see if we were going to be able to go on to win a pilot training slot,
Right.
which I did, and off we went.
So winning that slot, was that mostly through academics? How did you prove yourself to be eligible?
The same
more
way
than-
every other cadet did. You had to do well enough in a class. You had to have the right physical qualifications and not lose your eyesight or hearing or other things along the way.
But it had
And,
nothing to do with a stick?
Well, there were people who washed out, obviously, because they found that they either had motion sickness or some other
Right.
concerns that just kept them out of the cockpit.
Right. But just
But for the
earning
majority,
your, yeah.
the majority of the people that wanted to fly in those days, 75% of this is back in 1974. So after the Vietnam War is almost over.
Right.
It ended in 75. So it's this class we entered while it was still ongoing.
Right.
And 75% of all the cadets had to be pilot or at least weapons system officer or navigator qualified going in.
Right.
And that was to get a certain level coming out.
Interesting.
And so I think that requirement may have gone away over time, but still 75% going in did not guarantee 75% were going to go to pilot training.
Absolutely. Yeah. I understand that. It's interesting from that time because I know today, I can just testify for Israel because I'm not sure how it is in the States. I'm assuming it's similar. There's such a high demand that for kids to be pilots, not for the Air Force to have, because there's enough interest. There's such a huge interest that there's much more for the Air Force to choose from. So the percentage of people starting a class versus finishing a class is significantly low. I don't know if it's in relation to the 70s per se, but I know now a few hundred start and maybe 10 to 30 finish.
Well, at the Air Force Academy, I think the session numbers every year for new classes are around 1,600, and they've been graduating about 1,000 4 years later.
Oh wow, that's pretty good.
And the pilot training numbers are rated officer slots over time. That fluctuates. And I know the last few years there's a pilot shortage, so they're trying to get as many people through the academy and reserve officer training and officer candidate school as possible to go into the flying career field.
Right.
And so there's a big competition though with the airlines, and so a lot of schools today, 4-year degree issuing schools have courses and paths to get to be a pilot flying right out of school.
Right. But
And
can the airlines compete with the Air Force? They don't have F-16s. It's not fun.
it's a different kind of competition. So
It's a career competition.
it is, and there are a lot of people who would rather fly just fly the airlines
Sure.
and fly people around.
Well, they don't deserve a
and
slot in the Air
early
Force
on
anyway.
and not have to serve in the military. So there's that competition, and it's I think there's plenty of pilot slots going around for everybody. So there's a lot of competition for those young men and women
Right.
to go into that career path, and the Air Force has had to compete differently than 15 to 20 years ago
Well,
when they were competing to keep pilots in. Now they're competing to get the best and the brightest to go into the school and come out, graduate a pilot.
right. Interesting. So you graduated class of,
Class of 78.
and then first assignment, boom.
First assignment was into pilot training, so it takes 1.5 to 2 years to get through all that before you get to your first assignment. So,
Interesting.
and then I went overseas during the Cold War, as I mentioned earlier.
Right. And you were flying mainly what kind of airplanes?
I started out flying A-10s.
Oh,
And,
A-10s. That's a lot of
and they're still
infantry,
flying.
man.
That's right.
A lot of infantry people always ask for them, hope for them, pray for them.
Well, at that time in our history, F-16s, F-15s, and A-10s were all brand new. And so all those airplanes are still flying today, which is unusual in our history to have airplanes flying that long outside of things like the B-52.
What do you attribute to that?
First of all, they're more advanced than the initial airplanes that came out. A lot of the A models have been converted, sold off to others, or retired.
Right.
And then C model's a different airplane than an A model. So it's an F-16. They started flying in the 70s, but the ones that the U.S. flies today were mainly in the 80s. There might have been some early 91. Similar with the F-15. A-10s, though, are the same ones that came off the line
Wow.
back in the early days of, in the late about 1979 and 80, they were still coming off the assembly line.
That's wild.
And those have been taken apart, modified, new avionics and everything multiple times. And now the A-10s, I think, have been re-winged, most of them twice.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a process. Well, that's almost a new airplane. So the fuselage is the same, but that's it.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice if all the cars we bought would last that long?
They would if you took care of them the same way the U.S. Air Force does.
That's what I was going to go for. Yeah, they get such high level maintenance.
So it's a shift in procurement. There was a time when airplanes would fly for a certain amount of time, they'd be retired, be replaced by another set of airplanes that were coming along that had been in development, and many of them didn't fly for anything close to the duration that these airplanes are today.
Mm-hmm.
So what's shifted is from the procurement more into the sustainment, and that sustainment cost to keep your car looking like it was when you took it off the showroom costs a lot over time.
It's costly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So how long have you been flying airplanes?
So I started in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
1973. When I was at the academy, I hadn't flown before I went to the academy. So
Right. Yeah, I mean for the Air Force.
So I flew from the time that I graduated. 5 months after I graduated, I went to pilot training, and I flew all the way up until the time I retired.
Oh, really?
Right.
So in all your...
Not every assignment.
Mm-hmm.
There were gaps in between where
Of
I
course,
wasn't flying.
but you
I
kept
was-
your currency.
Yes.
Interesting. It's not
Well,
extremely...
I kept my qualifications to fly,
Right.
and I flew all the way up until I retired.
Wow. Is that common in the Air Force to make it up to a certain rank, which is, relatively high, and still fly all that time? For Air Force men, I mean. Airmen.
It is. For instance, the commander of Air Combat Command will still fly as a 4-star.
Really? Wow. I mean, I guess that does make sense. I think it's similar in the Israeli Air Force. It's just hard to think about because you guys are too busy running around extremely complicated tasks from the ground when you have time to fly.
If they're too busy doing that, then they're losing sight of what's going on with their most important assets, or people that are conducting the mission and executing the missions today.
So kind of like you would tell a field operations manager to keep their boots on the ground every once in a while to stay in field with what their people are doing. The same thing an airman must do and stay in the airplane every once in a while and not forget how the people, his boots on the ground look like.
Right, exactly.
Interesting.
And they need to see the commander out and about.
That absolutely makes sense. Okay. So that's a long flying career.
It is, and it was great.
And you did not want to develop that into what a lot of Air Force people do, which is from the Air Force to the airliners and all that.
That's a choice that a number of people make, but there are a lot of people who stay until retirement eligibility.
Right.
And retirement starts at 20 years
Yeah.
and goes on up from that.
So just retire from the military, call it a day.
No, a lot of people will hit 20 and then go fly for the airlines.
Oh, I
Because if
see.
you think about it, they're about 42 years old or so. If you look at the average college graduates, about 21 to 22 years old. They fly for 20 years in the Air Force, and they're only about 42 years old. Let's say they can go fly another 23 years with the airlines.
Right. It's super interesting.
So they can have multiple careers,
Right.
one in the military, one in civilian aviation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
So
the experience that they get, no matter what airplane they fly in the military, really builds their discipline and the depth of experience and the responsibilities of learning to plan those missions, execute those missions, debrief those missions, fly with crews, develop crew camaraderie. And that's a lot different it's considerably different than civilian flying. And so it's a great foundation for those that go over and do that. It's not to say it can't happen right out of the university and you start flying for a regional. I know some people doing that,
yeah.
but they're going to fly for those regionals to build up that experience over time, et cetera. That it just takes time to build up before they get a chance to move into the large airlines, for instance.
Right. No, that makes total sense. And like you've mentioned the type of skill and the level and the pace that you acquire in the Air Force is a completely different ball game. Happens faster. The requirements of you being sharp and on your feet and ready to move is a completely different story. So acquiring that level of skill, if at all, could take a whole lot longer anywhere else. That's, I think, one of the advantages that we get from serving in the military is that as hard as it is, we do get to be sharpened quite quickly. And if you don't sharpen as fast as you need to be sharpened, you might not be doing the job
Right.
you're asked to be doing. Interesting. So after all these years in the military, what's the total of years? How long did you serve?
I served almost 34 years after graduating from the academy.
All right. All the way to general, 2 stars.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, that's a long way. Most people say it's as long as they know of an individual that have done such a long path. It's uncommon. How many 2 stars
well,
are
when
in
you
the
think about
military?
it, people that have been in business, whether it's a large defense prime or civilian aviation or whatever, when they get to be leadership positions, they've typically spent 30 years in the industry as well.
Yeah.
Or so,
Absolutely.
Mid 20s to 30s when you see a lot of senior vice presidents and that sort of thing. So
You're absolutely right. It's not uncommon at all. If anything, it's expected for making it with the big boys. But it's such a demanding organization, the military, that tolls you heavily, personally, and on your family life. That seems so hard. My dad did serve for 25 years, so I've got a taste of it. And I, of course, being his son is not like being him.
sure.
But I just can't imagine how tolling it could be. And I guess, running a company for 30 years can be pretty tolling too.
All the different career fields have their own opportunities and challenges.
Absolutely.
And some of those folks that have been 35 years in business have moved every 2 to 3 years as well.
Mm-hmm.
Typically not at the same locations, but the more you get to know those folks, you find some people that had to go overseas themselves,
Right.
for different times during their careers in order to, in their company's eyes, continue to advance. So, we're not sending soldiers, sailors, and Marines into combat to advance.
Right.
We're sending them in to do the mission where they need to go, when they need to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. A little bit different, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, concepts are similar. So I'm super interested in leadership, and it seems like you have had a lot of opportunity to lead men in all kinds of positions and time frames. What do you think you would reminiscence on and say, leadership difficulties, skills, and challenges that you had to deal with over the years?
Well, as you know, it's leading men and women to accomplish the mission.
That's completely
And no matter where they are, and no matter when things are changing. So, for instance, serving in the Pentagon, the first female in the Air Force was assigned to a fighter. Later, as a wing commander, I was able to bring the first female into a remote, unaccompanied base that had never had a female pilot before.
Wow.
And we did that and ensured everybody there was ready to accept this pilot who happened to be female, just like any other new pilot.
Right.
And you, as a leader, you go out and work with the guys in this particular case
Yeah.
to make sure they understand what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And there's no room for not following through the proper way.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, it's been a process in the Israeli Air Force too. I can account for that. I remember that title in the news: first female jet fighter pilot. She's standing there with the helmet because, of course, they keep their confidentiality, and we never looked back as an Air Force. Of course, women had huge roles before. It's not the first thing, but it was just a milestone that opened up a lot of opportunity and a lot of just generally kind of hushed the guys a little bit, like, what? We can all do this.
well,
and
the charge to everyone there was treat her like every other wingman coming in.
Right.
She's a new wingman.
Right.
Put her in the squadron. You don't do any worse. I mean, you don't give any more. You don't give any less.
Absolutely.
The standard isn't any different. And this person did great.
Isn't that a great equalizer, though?
It is. And everybody recognized that this person was a brand new wingman to make the same kind of errors that other people make, and to learn from them and not make them a second time. And there were talents that person had that got to share with others as well.
Right.
And then when the thing I was most proud about with all the people at that base who knew this, the first female pilot that came over, who developed an unexpected health problem that was serious. And you would have thought every one of those people was her brother.
Wow.
Because they all rallied behind her, not only at that base, but she had to leave and stop flying, and they followed her through her progress until she got back to flying.
A bond is a bond.
Wasn't an assured thing.
Absolutely.
And so anyway, so people rise to the occasion when they know, hey, this is how things are going to be, and I need your help to make it happen.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Also opened the door for I'm sure a lot of young ladies out there. I know that after that occasion of the first female jet fighter pilot making it, getting her wings pinned, the percentage of girls even starting the course, not to speak of the amount finishing, which was significantly higher, was huge.
Right.
Because it unlocks this psychological barrier saying, wait, what? Well, it's not just for these guys. Yeah. We can do this too. And then, of course, actual fighting units as well. So combat units in Israel, there's mixed units. There's girls, female units where they go to combat just as guys do, go through the whole training and everything. And I mean, it unlocks barriers.
It helps when people have role models. That's for sure.
It does.
And somebody's got to be the first. So
it's true.
When the right person is selected to be the first, it can have a very positive impact for a long time.
I agree 100%. It makes a difference. It also teaches the guys something. So of course it's a good role model for the young ladies out there in high school trying to figure out what they're going to do, if at all, in the military. In Israel, it's clearly going to be the military. Just what in the military? But that's an interesting story. Yeah, I'm sure you've had to deal with a lot of leadership challenges over the years. I mean, right now CEOs are challenged regularly, with employees and getting the right type of people. I actually just got done reading a book. I don't know if we had a chance to talk about it. It's called The Talent War by Michael Sorelli. He's a SEAL. You know the guy in the story?
I know of the book. I haven't read the book.
Super
But the
recommend.
talent war is huge right now, and it's been going on for several years.
Right.
And especially as we look to bring manufacturing back to the United States, or just to grow manufacturing, whether it comes back or not, but in new arenas, there is a huge battle going on across multiple companies, whether it's defense, it's aerospace, it's in pharmaceuticals, it doesn't matter really.
It's in everyone.
They're all out for the talent.
Right. So as a CEO, what do you do to identify, interview, acquire, and maintain in-house talent? It seems so hard. It's no longer necessarily in the resume they send in and what they did in life. And these bullet points that are all set up to impress you. How do you see through that?
Well, I think there's a couple things actually since that book was written that have changed the game.
Right.
And one of them is called the pandemic. And one of them, inside a subset of the pandemic, is the response to the pandemic.
Right.
And so, when people were told don't come into work, work from home, when people were laid off, and then getting more money than they would typically get when out of work, it creates some unintended consequences, I believe, and challenges. And so the number of people who want to work is still large,
right?
But the number of people that want to work on necessarily your terms aren't as large as they might have been a year and a half ago.
I agree with that.
And so you've got to find ways to work the job description to be very, very clear, and to have an open mind, I think, as business leaders as well, which of the positions are critical that could still be done geographically separated, and which ones are critical that have to be done because of collaboration, cooperation, the whole brainstorming environment
Right.
that needs to be done face to face, and really make decisions on those, and then find the people that will fit that. But I don't think it's 100% one size fits all anymore. Like it never was, but there was a lot more that looked alike. Going to the office every day, parking in the parking lot, going to the cubicle, going to their office,
Yeah.
over and over and over again.
Right. And just that scenario that, you're describing sounds to me like we've been losing on efficiency so hard going to the cubicle. Like there's statistics shows that constantly 20% of your people are doing 80% of your work. How does a CEO, a leader, a chief or a C executive in the HR department, how do they solve for that? How do you improve on talent in the organization, maintaining it, identifying it? How does talent even look? I mean, for me, I know that the process they teach on the paper is go by the resume, see if he has the experience, required experience, but people write things all the time. When you sit down with somebody, if they ever even get to interview with you, what do you look for, and do you have an account of a story where you were just completely off and the guy was all the things you thought he's not, or the opposite?
Well, I can tell you that just in the past few weeks, those type scenarios have occurred. Just inside, some of the companies that I'm well familiar with, especially my own, where paper gets you looked at. That's the strength of paper. You never jump to hire based on paper alone.
Okay.
Because when you sit down face to face, it usually doesn't take more than a few questions to find out how much of that paper really has depth to it.
Right.
And how much does it really reflect the person sitting in front of you or not.
Right.
And so I know some people carry around the one question that they're going to ask everybody, and that's the golden question, and then it gets
the silver
published.
bullet.
It gets published, and everybody goes, "Ooh, cool!" If I
Now I know the answer to that
person, I don't know what to answer. I don't have one of those,
Right.
but I spend the time, and what I typically do is ask a question and then stop talking.
Just let them talk and then be the listener. Very smart.
People will tell you a lot.
They will. Yeah, just give them an opportunity. What do you think about the phrase, how does it go? Train for skill and hire for character. Or I think it goes actually backwards. Hire for character, train for skill.
So I think it boils down to this. Talent should never supersede character in prioritization.
I agree with that. Yeah. So in essence, you're saying you're agreeing with the phrase. So character first, and
Right.
if the person has the type of character that you're looking for, has the values that, the core values that you would look for in an employee, then you would be more than willing to train them properly because we have a person to work with, versus somebody that has all the skill set maybe, but lacks integrity, lacks other values that you and your company are trying to uphold.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I hope that a lot of CEOs are thinking that way, because it seems, for some reason, that a lot of people I talk to seems that it's a progressive thought that you should just have the college education. It needs to say those things. It needs to be 10 years of experience in that field, or don't even talk to us.
I think that I don't want to dive too deep into this, but I think over the last few years,
Yeah.
even places like the service academies, which have pretty rigid honor codes for a reason, because of the responsibilities that their graduates are going to be finding themselves in situations very early on. I think even the service academies have had to step back and go, is it just black and white? In other words, if there's an infraction, is the person out the door? And I think what they're doing is looking at it from how societies, I'll say, evolved
Right.
over time. And there may be many fewer who are raised in an environment where characters can be developed early on and often. And so
It's an interesting point.
So the service academies have always had to spend time in that arena with ethics classes and other things, okay, to polish. I think maybe if you go back in your days, polish the character.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're having to build some of the, work with some of the building blocks. And so I think they're having to step back and go, maybe there's some training, and training character is a different story. Growing, I think, maybe nurturing, developing.
Mentoring, yeah.
That we didn't have to do in the past, maybe didn't have the requirement, maybe didn't have the opportunity to spend the time on it either, because a lot of times those service academies have pumped out people directly into war and into combat.
Understood.
So I think that's something that's being grappled with in society today, but I still stand on character needs to be the overriding. You can train people to do a lot of things, especially if you're bringing them in to start putting them out front right now and be responsible for things. Mm-hmm. You can have mistakes on a purchase order and things like that and overcome all that. You have mistakes with integrity, you may never have that customer again.
Right. Yeah.
From a pragmatic standpoint.
Absolutely. The consequences.
The reputation of the company, et cetera.
I agree, 100%. Interesting. Well, I thought you would agree on that point, and it makes me feel good that CEOs in current times are thinking that way, because a lot of young people are looking at this and they say, "Oh, I don't have 10 years experience in this one thing," but I think if they just put themselves out there, keep getting the right experience, keep trying to get in front of the right people, and have their character put together well, maybe they'll have a chance at finally fulfilling a position that they see.
That's an interesting point you're bringing up, and a lot of people say that kind of goes to millennials.
I agree.
Millennials, they need to know the path. They need to see they can advance. They need to see that there's opportunity, and if they don't see that,
what's patience?
Then they're walking to go to the next company to see if they can find it there.
Right.
So I would say that is human nature that might be more across the board than just millennials, except maybe the millennials were willing to walk out the door faster than some of their predecessors.
Right.
But it's also incumbent upon their bosses to realize, hey, if we're going to bring everybody in here and in 5 years they're all going to be at the same spot, and then 7 years they're going to be at the same spot, and 10 years they're going to be at the same spot, your hiring process is probably somewhat flawed.
Yep.
Because going back to what you said earlier, 20% of the people, you can pick the number, you can pick a percentage, typically are the key movers and shakers in a company. Right. And they're the role models in many ways. Sometimes they're having to be those that push and pull. Mm-hmm. But if you're hiring everybody the same and you're not hiring those to become the 20%, your company's not going to do well in a few years. And so you need to hire a mix of those that you have a pretty good sense that if we develop them well, they're going to rise to the top and help continue on with this company. And others will leave because it's
they're going to leave anyway. You can
in many cases they will. Yeah. In many cases they will. But I think it's incumbent upon leaders to look at all those they bring in and work with those that report directly to them to ensure that there's a development path that matches the talent and the drive of the individuals they're hiring. Right. You have to have both.
That makes perfect sense. You can't, no free lunches, and also don't hold down the people that are trying to do everything for you. It's very interesting, the development of subordinates in general. And I heard this story. I don't know how true it is, but I think it's from Not Think and Grow Rich, How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of the old books. Mm-hmm. And this guy's telling the tale of Henry Ford, where they're having this meeting, and one of his chief executives is telling him, what if we develop all these people and they leave? And Henry's replying to him, what if we don't develop all these people and they stay?
Right. Seriously.
And I was like, boom, boom, light bulb moment. Develop the people, Whoever stays, great. Whoever doesn't stay, great. It's all fine, but not developing the people is not the answer.
I had an organization one time that had some great officers across the board, but different experience levels. And because of the different experience levels and the job that the environment they found themselves in now, that experience and their leadership added up to make it to really point to who should be in charge.
Mm-hmm.
I actually put a lieutenant in charge of a flight that had a lot of majors in it.
Wow. He was the right person.
And he did a great job. He was the first lieutenant.
Wow. You saw him as the right person for the job, and that was it.
And he was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. It takes a leader to see through that facade of ranks and jobs and experience, because sometimes this guy you need is hiding in between all the tall trees. But
Well, you can't do that all the time in every situation. But
of course.
In this particular situation, the majors were assigned to some headquarters jobs and things like that. So it set the stage to be able to do that.
Right.
And they fell in behind this first lieutenant and did great.
Amazing.
Pretty exciting flight to watch.
Right. Yeah, that's very cool. I understand it's not something that should be considered a norm, but like you said, the stage was set for something like that to work out perfectly. You saw the opportunity and made it happen. That's pretty cool. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can go about leadership all day, but before you have to skedaddle out of here, I want to ask you about MVAT.
Sure.
And of course about Marvin Test Solutions that you were leading today. Both extremely interesting organizations. Is MVAT something you've recently started entering into, or is that something you've been following along for a long time?
So a little bit of both.
Okay.
So when I went out to California in 2012.
What is MVAT?
So MVATS is Military and Veterans Appreciation Trust Foundation.
Okay.
And
Got a baseline.
It's an organization that is really focused on helping veterans make the transition to the private sector.
Okay.
And Gold Star families.
Right.
As well. And it is not an organization that is there to reach down into the ranks of the active duty and say, here, let me help you, come on and let's go over here and become a civilian now. That's not their mission. But the reality is that there are thousands who separate or retire from the military every year.
Right.
And it's a very large number. And so they have a resource when they decide it's their time to leave the military to help make that transition back to the private sector. And I said back to the private sector for a reason.
Right.
They all came from the private sector.
Did they?
They did.
What if they went straight from high school?
Who's born a soldier, sailor, airman, or marine? I don't think anyone.
That's
okay?
true. Whether
And
they were selling lemonade or going to high school, we're in the private sector.
Sure. So they came in, however they came in, and now they're returning back to the private sector.
Right.
But they weren't focused on the private sector in most cases while they were in the military.
Sometimes for a very long time.
That's correct. And the skill set and the things that we ask them to do don't always transfer directly to a resume. And so there are organizations under Military Veterans and Appreciation Trust Foundation like Heroes Linked, which is more of an execution arm, connecting mentors with those who have left or are planning to leave the military, or Gold Star families who are left behind.
Right.
From service members who died in combat or in the line of duty. And so we help all of them and those Gold Star spouses. And so we connect them up with someone who may have spent a lot of time in the military and is now giving back and in form of being a mentor or a resource that someone can reach out to through Heroes Linked and just chat about what they want, or actually way beyond chat, get a vector into a place where they could find employment, or they could find opportunities to enhance their skills, or they could find help in getting those resumes put together that now read like a private sector resume versus, I'm in the military, and you give it to someone in HR in a private sector and they go, I'm not quite sure what we're reading here.
Yeah.
And in many cases, a very talented individual would be passed by. And so helping them to get the words right on the piece of paper, to get the call, come in, we'd like to talk to you. Because in most cases, once they bring them in and sit them down,
they can tell.
there will be a lot more than what was on the paper, but you have to have the paper at a minimum to get in.
Understood. That makes perfect
And
sense.
so I was not doing anything formally except supporting through some of the activities that they did once or twice a year until just about a year ago. I had been with the USO, the Bob Hope USO in the Southern California arena, and had done that for about 3 years, including the last year as chairman. And it was time with a massive reorganization for the USO, bringing in to focus one board versus boards for 16 chapters around the country.
Right.
That my work was done there as far as a fiduciary board. And that's when MVATs was looking to expand their fiduciary board, and I went over there and joined on.
Wow. Okay. So now you're full-time MVAT supporter versus what was before here and there jumping on opportunities.
Right. I knew the founder and chairman who just recently passed away, unfortunately, but I knew him well because, again, it's someone that I knew as I was making that transition, connected me up, and I said, hey, you got a great thing going here. Let me help out.
Perfect.
But I couldn't be doing 2 or 3 of these things at one time, that's for sure.
Right.
So about once a year or so, we would support them. And then about a year ago, I decided, okay, I'll take more effort now since I'm closing out my direct USO support,
Right.
and I'll come over here to the MVATs. And the timing worked out well. We had some transition, as I mentioned. Our chairman passed away, and so we've been revamping the board, expanding the board, and most importantly, with what's happened in the world recently, MVATs is finding, as they have in the past, another opportunity to help veterans.
Right.
Those especially that spent time over the last almost 21 years in and out of Afghanistan or out of the Middle East, Iraq, and other places, who right now are experiencing a lot of different emotions as they see what's happening to those that they served with who may have stayed behind in a private sector role as a contractor,
Right.
or they may be people from Afghanistan who were actually helping the military in a variety of roles. That typically happen when you are there for that many years, whether it's a translator or other roles. And so I think they're experiencing some things that MVATs has put out some messages to them on their websites to say, listen, if you're having a problem, give us a call.
Right.
And we'll try to help. We'll get you connected with those who are the specialists at helping in those arenas.
Right. You're mainly referring to emotional struggles just since serving in such close proximity to people out there, beyond our borders in specifically Afghanistan,
Right.
are staying behind in a country that is now turning into a place that might be a little bit more dangerous than it was yesterday.
Correct.
So their personal relationships might be causing a lot of distress on emotional.
Well, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of those people are getting messages. Some are getting messages from people who later became contractors that are still in country trying to maybe get home. And they're not sure how that's going to happen. And so they're receiving those messages, and they might be feeling a little bit helpless to really help those that were their buddies,
Right.
in trying times in the past.
Right.
And others may just, they may not be in that situation at all, but they're just looking at it going, wow, what really happened? I was over there 7 times, and now
All
here
of a
we are.
sudden.
And so there's lots of emotions, and so MVATs and its board and its executive director have realized that those emotions are out there, and those emotions can have detrimental effects to those that are carrying them around. So, as you know, it's a tough battle coming out of a combat zone with the things that happen in combat, and with many of those people, they went through things that they'll never talk about.
Right.
But when a situation like this comes up, they need to know someone's there that can listen.
Right.
And in some cases, go beyond listening and help maybe direct them to people that can help.
Practically help
Right.
them out.
Right.
Right. So MVAT so at least is attempting to provide that platform support or initial steps, guidance, show you around whether you're just making it out of the military because you're done with your service, honorable discharge, and here you are to the world of private sector, like you said again, or you're just suffering from recent events that could have been.
Well, even to reinforce something that people need to hear from time to time, and soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, they're never going to tell you they need to hear this.
Right.
They'll say they don't need to hear this.
That's what we say.
But quite frankly, for someone to say thanks for what you did make a difference.
Right.
And we'll sit down later and talk about how it made a difference. But for right now, don't let what you're hearing and reading change the pride that you had in what you did, and the internal knowledge that what you did while you were there during the times we asked you to go forward made a difference.
Right. I second that, to say the least. It's definitely a hard challenge, and I'm happy there's somebody out there that providing that platform of support. It's not easy. It requires a lot of availability, and I hope people are reaching out to you guys and getting some help. I'll be the first to admit that going through those experiences, taking, even considering to be ashamed of what we've been doing for our civilians, whether it's here or there, fighting for freedom in any shape or form, it could be difficult. And sometimes when you go through it alone, that's when detrimental consequences can occur, and we were trying to prevent that as much as possible.
Well, on every bright day, there's darkness.
Sure, I
And
agree with that.
so, when people start having really tough emotions during the bright side of the day, the dark side can be really tough.
Right.
And so, hopefully, this message that's going out on the MVATs and Heroes Link website will prove to be a positive factor in the lives of some of these veterans.
Right. I hope so too. Where can people find MVAT?
So, MVAT.org or heroeslinked.org.
Okay.
We'll bring them right to it, and it's easy to get signed up. It's easy to get connected. And if from the MVAT side, again, that's the foundation, the Military and Veterans Appreciation Trust Foundation. That's really a place to go if someone is saying, how can I help this organization help more veterans? That's kind of the donation arm, if you will,
Right.
the fundraising arm.
Yep.
And they'd be welcome to go there. A variety of different ways to actually contribute and help. And then Heroes Linked is our primary arm of reaching out directly to the veterans and giving that hand to the veteran that they can grab and get connected.
Hence, Heroes Linked.
Heroes Linked, that's right. That's
I like
right.
that. It's practical.
And people don't have to be veterans. They didn't have to serve a day in the military to be someone on Heroes Linked who can help out veterans. Whether it's helping them to, again, employment, helping them walk through I'm going from this to this. How do I make that read a little better on paper? To I'm thinking about relocating to an area. Is there anybody out there who lives out there that could tell me about it?
Right.
Or what about this company? So there are people who are on the Heroes Linked network who've never been in the military, but they appreciate those who've done their military service.
Absolutely.
And then there are a lot of veterans as well.
Yeah.
Some that spent just a short amount of time in the military and some that spent careers,
Right.
like myself, who none of them will not give the time.
Right. There's no choice.
That's right.
It's just right there. But naturally, when you say Heroes Linked, my first thought is, on one hand, you have the heroes that served, that are seeking the hand, and on the other hand, you have heroes that are heroes for giving out the hand, whether they were serving or not. It has nothing to do with it. If anything, to some degree, some help is preferred from somebody who's not necessarily an expert of the military, but expert of writing a CV.
Right. It makes a lot of sense. And we look on our board to go out and have a very diverse board for that very reason. Because we need people that actually understand how to really navigate
How to be a civilian.
the private sector and be successful. And they've done it for 30 or 40 or more years.
Right.
And you don't get that just walking right out of the military typically in the first year.
No,
or
you
sometimes
really
even
don't.
in a decade.
It's true, yes. Unlucky ones may just wander around this entire time trying to figure it out, while you guys are putting a big effort to help with that. So that's great.
I should say one thing on the Heroes Linked. We're really linking the heroes to opportunities, whether that's opportunity for getting to the right organization they may have never heard even existed, who can help them through things that people leave. You know, they don't just leave with a DD Form 214. They leave with emotions, and they leave with challenges. And there are organizations that are out there that are so well resourced to help them, and they've got great experience. We link those heroes to those organizations, and then we link them to other parts of the private sector.
Right.
I don't know anyone inside of MVATs who's serving on the board or advisors or any of the staff who picture themselves as heroes. There's no hand out. There's just a hand up.
I hear that.
Okay, and linking them to those that really care about them and really appreciate the service that they gave to this country.
Loud and clear. Well, I like that a lot.
Or their family member who didn't make it home in the Gold Star family.
Right.
We make sure we don't forget about them either.
Absolutely. Yeah, we owe a debt to them, and hopefully people remember that and are there to help when there's nobody else,
Right.
specifically the person they lost. That's great. So do you care to tell us a little bit about Marvin Test Solutions?
Sure.
It seems to be a very interesting topic in my opinion. And you turned from retired Air Force general to private sector, like you said. We're talking about that transition and the integration. And I guess through a lot of experience and knowledge you've accumulated over the years, found yourself in the same or similar industry, I should say. How's that happen?
So Marvin Test Solutions is part of a group with the parent company being Marvin Engineering Company and a sister company being Marvin Land Systems. They're all focused on defense.
Right.
And so Marvin Engineering is one of the largest producers of bomb racks, launchers, and pylons in the Western world. You'll find them at every base you go to, whether it's an Army post or an Air Force base or it's a Naval Air Station or a Marine Corps Air Station.
Right.
Okay? And with many of the allies as well. You'll find the things that they produce. And then Marvin Test Solutions provides the test equipment used in production, but also all the way through the life cycle sustainment in the depot when parts and pieces come back to be overhauled or modified for new capabilities.
Right.
We're involved there. And our capabilities have carried to the flight line and the field and the specialty shops near the runways or the landing zones, et cetera, over time. So it's really great. It was a great opportunity. It came very early on after retiring to stay connected with the military in so many ways while expanding the aerospace and defense industry contacts and connection. And it's a global company. You'll find Marvin Test Solutions products in over 34 countries just on the military side today.
Oh, wow.
And unlike the other two companies, we also have a commercial side as well. And so we have commercial test equipment that is in more countries than I could outline here today. The different pieces and parts and total solutions. And the final thing that we do is it's a very innovative company, and we'll take some of our test capability and occasionally even embed it into systems that were never thought of having that kind of capability when the customer needs it.
Interesting.
And that's the kind of talent that we have in Marvin Test Solutions. We're very fortunate to have three of the original founders of the company still in the company. So
oh, wow.
got
So a lot of accumulated knowledge.
Great talent, and great corporate knowledge, if you will.
Right. So Marvin Test Solutions can speak of the talent war quite broadly and the successes they had with accumulating and sustaining, maintaining the talent in-house. That's not easy nowadays. Like you said, people just look for the first opportunity to run away and start something new.
Right. Well, it also forces leaders to grow.
Right.
And so, I know from the amount of study you do with leadership and the focus that you have on it, no one can go through life being a leader and continuing to be a leader without continuously learning, period. And so this whole thing of Generation X and Z and G and Y, and I guess we're going back to AA soon or something, whatever it might be, that's all great. But when you hear of horror stories, it's typically because those at the top were trying to stay where they were 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And they might just remember, well, this is how I got treated when I got in, and this is how we're going to do it all the way through. That doesn't work in the military, and it doesn't work in the private sector. And leaders have got to continue to grow and find new ways to help develop, motivate, and inspire. And quite frankly, inspiration is probably easier to do than motivating. Motivation, I believe, a lot comes from self.
I agree.
Inspiration, to be motivated, comes from the environment that you're in and the opportunities that are out there that you can earn. That you can earn.
Right.
And so anyway, I think we've got a lot of opportunity for being very competitive in the talent war, because we've got a lot of people there in leadership positions in the company that continue to grow and stretch their own capabilities of dealing with people and leading people and working with the customers.
Interesting that you say that. Yeah, I feel like from the common folk perspective, it seems like a lot of people from the ground look at the big companies and they say exactly what you're saying. It's a scary thought that some leaders just won't budge. And to your, I agree with what you're saying, which makes me think that companies and leadership layers that won't adapt to the new age, the new style. It should be the original style of leadership, in my opinion. But the more the style of leadership that we're talking about anyway, I think they won't make it. They'll eventually have to reinvent themselves as far as their leadership, and if they won't, somebody else will.
That's right. That's right.
It's an interesting change or evolution in that area, because like you said, there's a lot of this is how it used to be done in the old ways and all that kind of stuff going around, and that won't last, I think, because they say that people don't quit their job, they quit on their leader or on their boss.
In many cases, that's the case, and I think sometimes the entire situation gets wrapped up into one thing. Well, geez, we need to just change and keep moving, and there's nothing that's important, and doing it the old way doesn't matter. Doing it the old way, I think, should always be questioned as we go. Mm-hmm. But what's being done in many cases is a standard.
Right.
And so it takes the enlightened to figure out what needs to change in the way of development, what needs to change in the way of talent retention, but not losing the core values of the company, the core competencies of the company. And I think that's where people that stay attuned to the people they are leading, because that's all companies are.
Right.
It's people.
Yep.
It's people, and typically it's some intellectual property that's pretty important that needs to be protected.
Right.
And the better you treat your people, the better you protect the intellectual property that makes them be able to come in there and continue to grow, et cetera.
100%.
So it's connected. It's very much interconnected, and deciding and knowing what to change and what to reinforce is, quite frankly, a lot of the art of leadership.
I agree. It's a constantly dealing with dichotomies and balancing them out and not going overboard with one versus the other. It's not just a one fix all type of deal,
right.
Unfortunately.
Right.
Well, it's good to hear that current acting CEOs are thinking that way. It's very, I would say, inspiring for us younger generation coming up in the business world, hoping that we're going and aiming in the right direction. I think that like you said, people are first. That doesn't take away at all from appreciating that the core values of the company is something we're trying to protect, whilst staying open-minded about it. And if somebody points out a big flaw in it, we can consider it versus completely dismiss it.
Right.
So what's a word of advice for young leaders coming up in the business world today to stay competitive?
So to stay competitive, the first thing is you need to be qualified. You need to be credible. Mm-hmm. You need to be competent. And quite frankly, if you're approachable and you're humble, you're probably going to go a long way.
I like that. Humility is key. It seems like we're not born with it. Have you noticed? Not a lot of people carry that around. There's this guy I like, also a Navy SEAL, Jocko Willink. great leadership advice that I took from him. I read of a couple of his books, but he says, quite simply, be humble or get humbled. And life has a way of doing that.
It's a very succinct way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just kind of how it is, Be humble or life will take care of that.
Yeah. And you can mix credibility and competence with humility.
Right.
And you'll train a lot more people.
Sure.
And you'll have a lot more people following you.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
That's good.
So this has been great. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, Steve.
And it's been great to meet you this week.
Yeah.
And those circumstances in life, it's kind of one of those things you go, couldn't have planned that.
This is how I try to live life. It's just, it seems to work out that way, small world. And hope we can stay friends and keep in touch.
We will, for sure.
Awesome.
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Absolutely, Steve.